Without further ado, I do want to introduce our speakers. I'll first introduce Lindsey and then Drew about their research. There will be time in between for questions. If you have any, feel free to ask anything or ask for clarity throughout the presentation if there's some term or something that you want more clarity on. So our first speaker will be Lindsey Dewey. She is a PhD student at the University of Dayton. She is studying a variety of different things from invasive shrubs to birds as well. And today she'll be discussing some of her research on bird seed dispersal in some of the prairies that we have with our metro parks, as well as I think another area or two locally. So let's welcome Lindsey for her presentation.
I'm not very good at this.
So right, we'll go forward.
Hi everyone, so like she said, I'm Lindsey. I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Dayton. And today I'm going to present on one of my chapters, an assessment of the role of bird perches in woody plant establishment in restored prairies of the American Midwest. And all this research, like she said, was done locally. So first I'm going to talk about why prairies. Prairies are globally important ecosystem. They provide a lot of functions that are really important for us. The first function I want to mention is wildlife habitat. So prairies provide habitat for a lot of mammals such as deer and mice and raccoons, but they also provide nesting habitats for several birds. In Ohio, this includes killdeer, sometimes field sparrows, and sometimes song sparrows. Prairies also are a good source for carbon storage. So plants in general, of course, take CO2 from the atmosphere, which we have lots of CO2 in our atmosphere, and they do photosynthesis and they create biomass. And the prairie plants specifically, almost all their biomass is in their roots. So what this means is that prairies are taking CO2 from the air, bringing it down, and then putting it underground. And then when those plants die and they decay, that carbon gets stuck in the ground basically, where it can be stored there. And it can be stored there for a really long time. The third important function of prairies I'm going to mention is nitrogen fixation. So what nitrogen fixation is it's taking inert nitrogen gas from the atmosphere, and our atmosphere is full of nitrogen gas. And bacteria take that gas and they make it into ammonium, which is important because ammonium is a usable form of nitrogen. So nitrogen gas, we can't do anything with nitrogen gas, plants can't do anything with nitrogen gas, it's useless to all of us. Bacteria make it into ammonium, we can use it to grow and make molecules. Plants use it. When we eat those plants, we then get it. If something were to eat us, they'd get it. And prairies have, of course, other important functions, but those are just the ones I wanted to highlight. And I also want to say, if you have questions while I'm going through this, feel free to ask during the presentation or after. So prairies are, of course, large open grasslands. They're what's known as fire-dependent ecosystems. So this means for them to remain open, there has to be some source of fire that goes through them. And this really keeps a lot of trees from growing. In Ohio, our prairies are actually fire-dependent from people. So we don't naturally have a lot of fires from lightning strikes. Almost all of our fires are people-driven. And for a long time, the indigenous people burned our prairies, kept them open for hunting and grazing their livestock. Of course, European settlement came in. There was a lot less indigenous people, kicked them out. Europeans don't like fire as much, fire bad. And so we saw a shrinkage in Ohio, but also just across the US. So this is a graph from before European settlement, and these are Midwestern prairies, and then after a great reduction. So a huge reduction in big prairies, and then in Ohio, only about 1% of prairies remain. And this picture up here, the yellow, the light yellow, which is kind of hard to see on the screen, is all of our remaining prairies, which if you look, are in a little bit of our area. We're around here. So past threats to prairies included not being able to be burned and also being turned into farmland are being built on as they're very flat and fertile. But nobody's really doing a lot of that anymore. Land managers are reintroducing burning. There's been a movement to protect our prairies, so we don't want to turn them into agriculture that much anymore. But they're still facing a lot of threats. And one of the big ones they're facing is habitat fragmentation. And habitat fragmentation is shown here. So in one habitat, you can see there's two parts. There's an interior habitat and an edge habitat. And for us, the interior habitat, that dark green, would be an open prairie, so just nice grasses. And our edge habitat would still have grasses, but it would likely also have a few trees. So it's slightly different species. When we break the habitat up into two different habitats, we see that we get a lot more edge habitat compared to prairie habitat. So suddenly, there's a lot more trees in that area. And of course, also there's now space in between them. And this can cause limited seed dispersal. So this is just an example I came up with. So if we have one prairie that we split into two by, say, building a town on it, and our prairie grasses are wind dispersed, most of them. So these seeds here, big blue stem, which is a very common prairie grass. And suddenly, from the seeds at the top prairie to get to the bottom prairie, they have to blow through this town, all these buildings, all these cars. What's the chance they're gonna make it? And then even worse, if this bottom prairie gets turned into a farm, Farmer Joe buys it, thinks it's gonna be a great place to farm, farms it for 5 years, finds out it's a terrible place to farm, it floods horribly, doesn't wanna pay to fix that, and so he just leaves it. These are suddenly gone. But how are these seeds going to get back to this fragment to reestablish a prairie there? What's likely going to get established is something that we don't want there, such as an invasive species. So the second thing that can happen with habitat fragmentation is woody encroachment. And this is where trees at the edge habitat are slowly pushing themselves into that interior habitat. And this can come from having just more of that edge habitat, so more trees around, and especially if we have less fire, the trees just slowly migrate inward and close off that prairie. So now getting a little bit more into dispersal, I'll keep kind of getting closer and closer to my exact research question as I go. So I've talked a little bit about wind dispersed. Mammals also disperse a lot of plants, they eat seeds, a lot of fruits, but what I really want to focus on is bird dispersal. And birds can disperse plants really widely. They can fly over buildings, they can fly over streets. They don't have the same barriers that plants are going to have, or even some mammals are going to have. And while birds and mammals are great at dispersing native species, they're also really great at dispersing invasive species. And an invasive species is an introduced or non-native species in Ohio that aggressively reproduces and expands into natural areas or other green spaces, negatively impacting native Ohio species, ecosystems, and people. So this definition comes from the Ohio Invasive Plant Council, so it's specific to Ohio. And on here I have a few common invasive species that are spread by our native animals. The first one shown here is our honeysuckle, or no it's not, it's autumn olive. And autumn olive is a tree, it pops up, it grows quickly. This one in the middle is Callery pear. I don't know if you guys all know, but it's out in an open field, it's surrounded by grass and popping up everywhere. And this final one is a Mar honeysuckle, again, dispersed by birds and mammals, and is found all over in our woods, unfortunately. So going deeper and getting closer to my research question, birds, like I said, can disperse stuff very far, and they actually show a preference for where they disperse seeds to. They like to disperse seeds at the edge habitat and underneath the perch. And this can be a problem in prairies for two reasons. So at edge habitat, or underneath, at the edge habitat, at the edge habitat, there's a tree. This should be here, but then say a bird comes and sits on that tree, drops some seeds, maybe it was feasting on some nice autumn olive. Suddenly an autumn olive tree grows up, but it grows up just a little bit farther in. It's that woody encroachment again, and then it can happen again. And suddenly the trees are just getting closer and closer to the center of the prairie. So underneath the perch can be a really big problem for some of those species like calorie pear. So like I said, calorie pear is out, it's now on this grassland, and suddenly it pops up, and suddenly it's a perch. So perches are attracting birds, this is well documented. Birds are coming and sitting on that perch and likely dropping more calorie pear seeds. So suddenly that one perch grows into 2, 3, and just keeps expanding out until instead of having a field of nice grass, we have a field of calorie pear. So I wanted to study this. So I set up an experiment and I hypothesized that proximity to forest edge would increase the amount of seed rain. So what I'm saying is that as we get closer to that forested edge, that edge have to have some trees, that birds are going to be more comfortable there because they have more shelter there, more places to land, and they drop more seeds there. And this could lead to woody enrichment. My second hypothesis is that sites with bird perches will have more seeds than sites without. Just saying that birds like to have a place to land and that they'll drop seeds. And then my final hypothesis is that birds are dispersing woody invasive plants into open fields. So getting a little bit into how I did this. I chose 2 sites. The first site that I did was Prairie Conservation Area. It's a large prairie out near Trotwood. It is owned by 5 Rivers Metro Parks. And you can see it has a thin forested border. It is post-agricultural land. And it has a good number of invasive species within the vicinity of it. My second property is actually a private property, which we call a forest preserve. You can see it's a smaller prairie and it's surrounded by a lot more trees, but also it is restored, so it doesn't have very many invasive species within the proximity of the prairie. So to test my second hypothesis that perches would matter, I built these perches out of wood, and then I just cut the lid off a basket and put it underneath to catch some seeds. I did put some metal mesh over the top of the basket because mice will steal your seeds, and put some fine metal mesh within the basket to make sure that if the seeds got rained on, they wouldn't wash right out. I also put up a few cameras. I was interested in what birds were sitting on my perches, when birds were sitting on my perches, if they were even working, because when I started this, I wasn't sure if birds were just going to be terrified or not. And then to test my first hypothesis that forest edge would increase seed rain, I set those perches from 0 to 15 meters. And so I set one basket with a perch over it, and then I set about 10 meters away a second basket with no perch. It was just out in the open, just to confirm my second hypothesis. And I set up around 30 baskets total at Spring Conservation Area, so that's slightly larger prairie. And then at the Felt Forest Preserve, because it was slightly smaller, we set up baskets from 0 to 20 meters, and I only set up 24 baskets. So finally, getting into some results. So I began sampling in late June and ended in late or early February. Sampling lasted for about 32 weeks then, and then I collected a total of 154 samples. And what this means is that I saw bird poop in a basket 154 times, took it back to the lab. It doesn't mean that I found seeds in bird poop 154 times. And then I did find a total of 414 seeds. This may seem low to some people who have seen bird poop just full of seeds. Last year, if some of you remember, it was a drought, and that had an effect on if plants were fruiting and then how long the fruits were on the trees. So this is a very low number. So this first result wasn't one of my hypotheses and actually surprised me a lot. So what I was expecting was this first circle. This is July and August. I had this spike of summer seeds. It was what I expected. It was white mulberry and black raspberry. That's what I expected. And then I was expecting it to taper off. The fruits were gonna fall off the plants and there was gonna be no more seeds and I was gonna be done with my field season. That didn't happen. So it started to happen and we got about to here, October, and I started celebrating that I almost wasn't gonna have to go out and walk around these prairies in the cold anymore. And then we got to late December, January, and suddenly there was a huge spike in seeds again. And I was like, what's going on? Well, it turns out when I looked at those seeds under a microscope, it was mostly honeysuckle and multiflora rose, which are invasive plants. So what I think may have happened is the birds that don't migrate got really hungry. It was very cold, there was snow, nothing else was out, and so they went to honeysuckle, which has something called extended phenology, so the fruits stay on the plants longer than our native fruits, and it ate a bunch of those, and it needed to eat a lot of them because they're low in nutrients. Similar with multiflora rose. So that was just an unexpected result that I plan to investigate more. So now going back to my hypotheses, my first hypothesis was that proximity to forest edge would increase the amount of seed rain. So here I have baskets collected, so this was just presence or absence of bird food. And this is distance. And this red line here is felt forest preserve, so that's slightly smaller prairie. And I don't see a trend going up to 20 meters. And then our blue line is spring conservation area, that's slightly larger prairie. And we do see potentially a trend forming here with the 30 and 50. I am doing a little bit more with this year. I'm actually going out to 100 meters, so if I'm invited back to do this again next year, maybe I'll have more of an answer to this, but right now it doesn't seem as though birds have a preference at distance. So, moving on to my second hypothesis, sites with bird perches will have more seed rain compared to sites without. I definitely saw this, so this is number of seeds collected, and this is either a basket that was underneath the perch or a basket that was not underneath the perch. Yeah, that pretty clearly shows that perches mattered, which was exactly what I was hoping to find, as a lot of papers said this before me. So my final hypothesis was that birds are dispersing woody invasive plants into open fields. And so I have a number of seeds collected on my y-axis, and then I have just non-woody and woody on my x-axis. Unfortunately, every woody plant I got ended up being invasive, so you can almost think about it as native and invasive. I got some common buckthorn, which we do have a native buckthorn, but this was not it. Honeysuckle, a little bit of Cali pear. I got white mulberry, which is technically not considered invasive in Ohio yet, but it's considered invasive in many places, and with the amount that I've seen spread into some of these natural areas, I wonder if just in a few years we'll see it considered invasive here as well. And then of course multiflora rose. So we can definitely see that there was more woody invasive plants dispersed to these areas than the non-woody plants. And a lot of these woody plants actually came from that larger prairie that had invasive species near it. And like I said, I had cameras up. So I captured a lot of birds with my cameras. Some of them, while they're very pretty, probably don't mean much to me. So ones like this little yellow guy, a common yellowthroat, he eats insects. So while he may have pooped in the baskets, I wouldn't have gotten any seeds from him. Indigo bunting, this pretty bluebird, eats seeds actually, so it likely munched the seeds up. And I was looking for whole seeds that I knew would then germinate and grow into plants. So these two may have affected some of my results when looking at number of baskets collected. The ones that really probably influenced the number of seeds I got was the American robin and the northern cardinal. And both the robin and the cardinal are generalists, so they'll eat fruits, insects, seeds, and they're also both non-migratory. So in winter, when I saw that big spike of the invasive seeds, these two were likely the culprit. So track things up. Unfortunately, birds are dispersing woody invasive seeds into prairie habitats. And if there's perch in those habitats, it could be attracting more birds. So if you have a prairie habitat and you want to try and keep it as free of invasive as possible, it might be worth it to go out and look and make sure that any trees that are starting to grow are chopped down. We did find that birds may not be contributing to woody encroachment. And then these results were likely influenced by drought. Like I said, the fruits, especially in the summer, I didn't see as many as I should have. So doing it again this year, I should have better results as to what summer and winter will look like without drought. And then I have a few fun little pictures of my camera's caught that are really not useful for me since I'm looking at birds. We have possum. Raccoons love to turn the baskets over and just ruin stuff. They thought they were toys. This raccoon managed to get on the perch, which was impressive. The rabbit was really curious. And then I've had so many pictures of mice. They think the perches are like a jungle gym. They like run across the top and they just set up the camera for hours at night. And then of course a few curious deer. I don't have a acknowledgement slide because I forgot, but first thing you fiber as much barks in the human lab, and I've had a lot of undergrads help me throughout this. So.
There's plenty of time for questions.
Sorry. I was excited.
You got a question?
No, you go ahead.
Okay. How did you determine perch height, and would that dictate what species would be present?
I looked into that some, and I didn't find anything about like specific perch height. I mean, there are some species like the bob whites that are more like ground birds that I wasn't gonna get. But I just went with like perches that are about this tall. And I don't, yeah, it shouldn't have a big effect on which species. When I looked into it, it could be like too short could be an issue because they won't see it.
That's interesting.
I saw him first, but I don't know. Yeah.
Did you find anything in your data as far as like, what, species the birds actually prefer to eat, native versus non-native? I mean, I guess my big question is, do the birds prefer the junk food offered by the invasives or the healthy stuff offered by the natives?
I would assume they prefer the more nutritional native fruits. Like I said, they really didn't start eating the invasive fruits until it got cold and we didn't have any more natives, so they waited until there wasn't any other options. In like the summer, I really didn't see any native fruits, even when the honeysuckle had berries on them. And even this year, coming back, I'm not seeing a ton of like honeysuckle or invasive fruits. I'm seeing a lot of like black raspberry. So
Okay.
when given the choice, I'd say they're choosing the native fruits.
Okay. Interesting.
So is he concerned that having the birches being kind of white and very contrasting could deter birds a little bit compared to having something more natural looking?
Yeah, so when I first started, I tested a few things out, and I didn't using it, but I tested out like PVC, like bright white, and they're actually more attracted to that than anything. So I don't know. I guess maybe they like the contrast or something. I did have. I don't think I have a picture of it. I did have a red-tailed hawk that really liked the perch to hunt from for a while, which of course did nothing for my results. It actually made it so birds wouldn't land in like that entire area. But yeah, I thought I would have to make them more like wood-like, and they are like a light wood, which with prairie grasses kind of blends in. If you think of like a big blue stem, it's kind of a light brown.
What do you, I don't know, this is more of a bird question. So,
Okay.
what do you do for the birds that are not migrating, or are hungry, and there's not like native fruit? Like how do we like discourage them from eating the invasive stuff? We just put out more
Yeah, I've seen
birds.
more than one paper that covers that because a lot, like especially with habitat being destroyed, then they would have like seeds or native fruit. They're not really there anymore, so it's really just replacing some of the invasive with things they can eat during the winter.
Another question.
Okay.
One of your conclusions was that these don't add to woody encroachment,
I didn't see evidence that they were adding to the encouragement.
meaning
That they
the
aren't
seeds-
dropping more seeds at the woody edge, which can lead to the woody edge kind of slowly moving inward.
So that doesn't imply that they're not leading to woody plants in the prairie, it's
Yeah.
just not next to the edge.
Yeah, they're not causing it to move in.
I'm actually not sure of the answer to this, but like, it could be that birds fly and poop as opposed to perch and poop.
So that's why we had the baskets without perches as a control. And there was almost no, I think 95.6% of bird poop that we found was in a basket that had a perch.
That makes sense.
All right, one last question.
Was there a natural occurring seed that they had a higher preference for, that you noticed in, when we were counting from all the different baskets?
I would say, they liked black raspberry.
Good choice. I do too.
But that it's really hard to say this year, this 2024 year, because of drought, and I also didn't get out until June because I was trying things
Okay.
out. I didn't really have a lot of seeds until I got some of those invasive. I probably doubled the seeds by having those invasive species in November and December. Yeah, so like black raspberry was the big one.
Okay, that answered my question, thank you.
By volume, do you think the raccoons and opossums are more important in dispersing seeds than the birds?
By volume,
We have a
I
limitation for
can't
quantity
say
of-
well, because I've never
Methods
looked into
compared to
bird
birds.
dispersal, or mammal dispersal. I know they do, of course, disperse seeds. A project I'm hoping to work on soon might tell me a little bit more about raccoons dispersing calorie bear. But I'm not sure. Raccoons, I don't know their home range is really, I think, the biggest thing. It depends on how far they move. I would say if they're really out there dispersing a lot.
Are raccoons territorial? Would they establish a perimeter and keep the other ones
I
out?
don't think so. Because I feel like you can see multiple raccoons in like the same area, like living at home. There's more than one raccoon that comes and messes with my mom's flower pots. So I would say they can live together.
All right, well, thank you, Lindsay.